Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we get to see the exciting return of the current world chess champion Ding Liren to the board. Now, Ding Liren won the world chess championship all the way back at the end of April in 2023, right after the World Championship, which he won against Jan Nepomniachtchi. He played in the Grand Chess Tour event held in Bucharest, Romania, which ended on May 15th. Now, since that time, we have not seen Ding Liren anywhere. He has not played any chess, whether it be online, whether it be rapid, whether it be classical chess. He has simply been missing. But today, on January 6th, we do see the return of Ding Liren to action as he competes in the first ever China Chess Kings Championship, which is an 8-player rapid event, 2 games of rapid chess in a knockout format. So it will be whittled down from 8 to 4 to 2 to 1. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action. Now today, in the first game of the 2-game match, we have Ding Liren playing against Bai Jinshi from China as well. All of the 8 players are from China in this event, as the event, of course, is called the China Chess Kings Championship. So, game 1 of the 2-game mini-match, we start with d4 from Bai Jinshi. We get knight to f6 from Ding Liren. We now get the move knight f3. Actually, let's look at it from Ding's point of view. Let me flip the board, of course, and we get the move e6. Now, Bai Jinshi plays g3, and Ding decides to play this move b5. Now, Ding could have played the move d5 here, and after bishop g2, bishop e7, and c4, for example, we would have been in one of the favorite systems that Ding Liren has played a lot with the white pieces and also with the black pieces, which is the classic Catalan opening with the knight and the bishop being fianchettoed. So Ding plays b5 here to try and stop white from going c4. This is one of the drawbacks potentially with white not playing c4 right away. You could of course play c4 here, preventing this b5 push, and after d5 g3, then you would have the Catalan. So we get g3 b5. We get bishop g2 played by Bai Jinshi. Ding plays d5 to shut down any threats on this long diagonal towards the rook on a8. We now have the move a4 being played. Ding plays b4, we get c4, and Ding plays en passant with pawn takes pawn. Now, if Ding were to take what looks like a free pawn on c4, white has knight to e5, opening the massive scope towards the rook on a8. And after knight to d5, white can maybe even go e4 here to kick the knight. You go to b6, kick the knight again with a5, knight goes back, knight takes pawn. Even material, but white has the big white center here, and white is definitely better. So Ding goes for en passant with pawn takes pawn. Now Bai Jinshi captures with the knight. Now Bai could have captured with the pawn on b2, trying to play c4 anyway, but now after black plays a move like knight c6 castles, black can play something like bishop a6, trying to stop white from playing c4. Great scope towards the pawn on e2, and long term, for example, say you play something like bishop b2, there might be rook b8 to pressure the bishop. Even knight to a5 and knight c4 becomes an idea to create an outpost for the horse. So Bai Jinshi plays knight takes pawn. We get knight bd7, castles, bishop to a6 played here, trying to pressure the pawn on e2. Bishop to f4 is played, and now we have this move c6. Now c6 is played here for a couple of reasons. First of all, this pawn on c7 could become a serious weakness. If you play a move like bishop e7, white has knight to b5, pressuring the pawn on c7. If you push the pawn, spaghetti-o, here comes a big fork with knight to c7. If you trade for the knight on b5 after takes and castles, white can go queen c2 and rook fc1, and suddenly there's a lot of pressure on both of these pawns on c7 and a7 as well. So Ding goes c6. It takes away this knight b5 idea, and now even if white goes rook c1 here or queen c2, after bishop e7, rook d1, and castles, black can always go rook to c8 to overprotect the pawn on c6. Now Bai Jinshi plays e4, which is a very important move here because black structure is very solid. If white had captured with the pawn on c3, he could try to play c4 and contest the center here, but with white not having a pawn to push to c4, the only way to try and go after this triangle of pawns is to play e4 and try to open up some scope for the light square bishop in the long term. So Ding plays rook c8. We now get the move h4. This is a typical alpha 0 move. We've been seeing a lot of these h4 style moves being played by players such as the former world chess champion Magnus Carlsen, Daniil Dubov, another player who's played these g3 h4 setups a lot in the Catalan as well. So Ding plays knight takes e4, we get takes, queen takes pawn, and now knight to f6 is played, queen c2 back, and Ding now goes queen b6 here, preparing to play this move c5 to open up the c file for the rook, but it also allows black to put the rook on d8 and put pressure on the pawn on d4. Now computer by this point saying it's very equal, no big advantage for either side, but honestly in a rapid game I would prefer to be blacker due to one of the dark arts specials here, which is the idea of reactionary moves versus finding a plan. Now for Ding, he wants to go c5, he wants to go rook d8, whereas for his opponent Bai Jinshi, he has to come up with a plan here. Do you play knight e5? Do you play a5? Do you play rook ac1? It's not really so easy to come up with a plan, and in rapid and blitz games, when you're the one where your moves are reaction, very straightforward, and your opponent has to come up with the idea, generally that's going to get them in a situation where they have to spend more time on the clock and they can make more mistakes. So Bai Jinshi does play knight to e5. We get c5 from Ding. a5 played here to attack the queen on b6. Ding plays queen to b5. We get queen to a4 being played here. Ding trades the queens and now plays this move bishop b5. Now after bishop b5, we got rook a1. Rook is no longer hanging on a4, and Ding goes c4. Now the computer does not like this move. In this position, it thinks that black should trade on d4 and play a6 here, locking the pawn and the bishop in step here on these two squares. Black can play bishop c5 down the road, maybe rook c2, maybe rook d8, and computer thinks it's pretty balanced. Ding instead plays c4. We now get the move bishop b7, and after rook c d8, we get the dreaded draw in this first game of the two-game mini match between Ding and Bai Jinshi. Now, of course, it follows with the trend where lately all the rage has been talking about whether draw offers should be permitted, not permitted in FIDE events, and whatnot. Now, in this event in China, draw offers are still permitted. Players are on move number 22, so it is what it is. Now, computer actually thinks that here Bai Jinshi could have continued with this move pawn to a6, protecting the bishop on b7 with ideas like knight to c6 or rook ac1, and white is actually supposed to be a little bit better. But again, in a rapid game, first game, you're playing as a world chess champion, no time to take such risks. So first game of the two-game mini match does end in a draw, and now we move on to the second game. Now, the second game, Ding Liren here is playing with the white piece. The situation very straightforward. If Ding wins this game, he moves on to the semifinals to play against Yu Yangyi, another very strong 2,700 plus Chinese GM. If the game is drawn, they go to tiebreakers. Now, in order to find these games, you guys, I had to go to a Chinese website which was relaying the games. I could not find them on chess.com or chess24. So to be honest, I don't know what the tiebreak procedure would be if the second game were to end in a draw. So Ding opens with c4 here. We get the move c5, symmetrical English setup here with c4, c5. We have knight to f3, knight to f6. Ding plays knight c3, and now we get this move e6. Here, Ding plays the move g3. Now, Ding had played this move like d4, d5, for example, in e3, which is what he played in the famous last round of the candidates in 2022 in Madrid, Spain, against Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura. This game could have proceeded with something like a6, and it would have been a very interesting game. Alas, we don't get this as Ding plays the move g3. Now we have d5 being played by Bai Jinshi, takes, and now d4, and we have transposed into the classic semi-trash variation in this English opening. Now, normally the way you get to the semi-trash is out of a regular order with, say, d4, knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, d5, and after knight f3, black can play c5. You can also reach it after, say, c4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, c5, takes, and knight f3, knight f6. Multiple ways to reach this path, but we get it anyway. So we get d5, takes, d4, and knight c6. Now, three players who have probably been playing this most with the black piece are Grandmasters Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru Nakamura, and Daniil Dubov. All three of those esteemed players have been playing this quite frequently in various tournaments. So we get a3 played here by Ding, a quiet move, maybe with the idea of taking on c5 and playing b4. Say black goes here, you can maybe take and go b4, extra tempo, force the bishop to move, and then fianchetto the bishop on the long diagonal. Additionally, black has a tough decision. Do you move the bishop? Do you take on d4? How do you proceed with your development? So Bai Jinshi decides to take on d4. We get knight takes pawn, bishop to c5. Ding plays bishop to e3 here, protecting the knight on d4. If black were to play a move like castles, this actually would lose the game, because after knight takes knight, attacking the queen, you take the knight, bishop takes bishop. Spaghetti. White has two bishops and a knight. You've got a bishop and a knight. You're missing a bishop on the board, and you will lose in a very embarrassing manner to the current world chess champion. So we get bishop to b6 played by Bai. Now if knight takes knight, black can take, and the bishop on b6 is simply safe versus being on the c5 square. So Ding plays the move bishop g2. We get knight to g4 being played here. Now this is a move that makes some sense, but it is also a little bit dubious. In this position, what black probably should have played was castles, and after h3, rook e8, and castles, we've reached a pretty standard position here where white is trying to put pressure on the centralized pawn here on d5, the isolated pawn as we call it. Black can just play something like h6 followed by bishop e6, and white is maybe a little bit better here, but it's nothing to write home about. Bai Jinshi, however, decides to play the move knight g4, which is very aggressive. Black's idea here is to try and go after the bishop and the knight, try and destabilize this great bastion on d4 as fast as possible. However, when you play knight g4, now white can play knight takes d5, grabbing a free pawn in the center of the board. We get knight takes e3, f takes e3, and Bai Jinshi castles, and Ding castles right back. Now, white is currently up a pawn in the center of the board, but it is not a great extra pawn. White has the extra pawn being the stacked double isolated e pawns on e3 and e2 here. Black has ideas like rook e8, maybe you can take on d4, and it's really a question of here, can white consolidate his position before black can bring the rook into the game, bring the bishop into the game, and maybe try to win some pawns in the center of the board. So we have rook e8 from Bai Jinshi, we get rook c1 played by Ding Liren. Now we have bishop to d7. Rook to c3 played, an excellent move here to overprotect the pawn on e3 here with both the knight and the rook. Bai Jinshi plays rook c8. Ding plays knight to b5 here. Now computer actually thinks that white should trade on b6 and play this move queen to b3 here, forcing an endgame, but it is understandable why Ding did not go for this, because after b6, which stops the knight c5 jump, white is still up a pawn, but you have these double pawns, and after rook c1 knight e5, it's not really clear how you're ever going to make use of this extra pawn whatsoever, even in an endgame. So Ding plays knight to b5. We get the move knight to e5 played here. Now we have rook takes rook, bishop takes rook, not queen takes rook, because then there's knight d6, and look at D's knights in the middle of the board, forking every last little piece which exists. So we have bishop takes c8 played here by Bai Jinshi. Knight b5 back to c3 played by Ding here, trying to support the knight on d5, and also now this pawn on e3 should always be secure, and most importantly you have a bastion. However, black can now play this move knight to c4, and suddenly it's not really clear what white is going to do, because the pawns on b2 and e3 are very weak. So Ding plays knight takes bishop, we get queen takes knight, knight to d5 played. Bai Jinshi correctly plays queen takes b2 here. Now on first glance this might look very scary, because white can play this move knight to e7, checking the king on g8, and if black takes, you have queen d8 check, rook e8 takes, and we reach the classic ice skater checkmate with the king being stuck on the back rank. Additionally, if you play something like king h8 here, maybe you're worried about rook takes f7. If you go king to f8, now there might be takes, and something like queen d7 to hit both the pawn and the rook at the same time. But after knight e7, king to h8 here, black is actually completely fine, because after white takes on c8, let's say white were to play rook f7, because that's the line I mentioned, black can go bishop e6, attacking the rook. You move the rook, now I can simply take the pawn, and out of nowhere, black's king is actually very safe on h8. There are even ideas like bishop g8 down the road to protect the king. So Ding here does not play that. Instead, he plays queen to a4, another idea of triple attacking the knight, the rook, and the pawn all at the same time. Now here Bai Jinshi plays the move b5, which is the first sort of mistake here. Black should have played knight to d6, guarding the rook on e8. After queen takes a7, probably a quiet move like h6, or maybe h5 is a computer move, but either h6 or h5, I'd probably play h6 personally. White is still better here, but the extra pawn is this pawn on e3, and with these two pawns, it still is very questionable whether white has enough to win the game. Instead, we get b5. Now queen takes a7 is played, attacking the pawn on f7, and Bai Jinshi goes bishop e6. Ding Liren proceeds with knight to c7, forking the rook and the bishop at the same time. Here we get rook to f8. This is the best move. Knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight, and now queen to e7 played here by Ding. We get rook takes rook, bishop takes rook, and now white is threatening to play queen to e8. Again, another version of the ice skater. Say you play knight takes e3, queen e8. King has no squares available, as it's simply stuck on g8. So now we get queen takes a3, Ding plays queen takes e6, king f8, only move. If you go to h8, same problem, queen c8 with the ice skater. So we have king to f8, queen to f5 played, king to e7, queen g5, king f8, we get king to f2 played, and now the move queen e7. Now all these moves that Bai Jinshi is finding here are the absolute best moves, and the game is still pretty balanced. White remains up a pawn, but it is this double pawn on e3, and it's very hard to prove the advantage. So we have queen to f4, queen f6 played here. Ding of course plays bishop g2. He does not trade the queens, because after takes here, black is actually maybe potentially trying to push for a win here with his b pawn going up the board, and at the very least, even here you get a position like this. White is up a pawn, but this extra pawn is very crummy, and all of black's pieces here are on the opposite color of the light square bishop. So Ding goes bishop g2. We get the move b4 being played. Ding plays bishop d5. We get the move knight b6, bishop to b3. A nice move here, blockading the pawn from pushing further down the board and also trying to create threats on this long diagonal. And last but not least, blunting the power of this dark square knight, because the knight cannot go to either d5 or c4 or a4 in this position. So Bai Jinshi goes king e7. Ding plays king g2. We now get the move queen c3. Black, of course, does not trade the queens because that would undouble the pawns. And now in this position, after, say, king f3, knight c5, and bishop c2, maybe actually computer still thinks that black is kind of okay in this position, but white will have 4 pawns on the king side, and white probably will have great chances to win the game. And in a rapid game specifically, there's very little chance for black to hold this. One sample line, I'll just give you guys an example, is something like this, where white takes, and you get like f5, king f4, g4, h4. White is going to create the Great Wall of China to start pushing p up the board. And in a human rapid or blitz game, very unlikely you're going to draw this, even though the computer says that this is zeros amazingly. So
viewer discretion is advised. On January 10th, all 5 episodes. 1.
We have queen c3 being played here by Bai Jinshi. Attacks the bishop, covers the c7 square, and guards the pawn while targeting the pawn on e3 and guarding the pawn on g7. Ding plays bishop g8, and now we get this move h6. Queen to e4 played here. King d6 played by Bai Jinshi. Ding goes check. We get king c5, e4 played here, and now let's move queen f6. Now what's amazing about these moves is that Ding is way ahead on the clock here, but computer is giving all these moves as the absolute best replies from Bai Jinshi, even though it feels like these moves are not so easy to find. So we get queen f6, queen to e8 played, now king d4 played here, and this is where Bai Jinshi makes a fatal blunder. In this position, if Bai Jinshi had played queen b2, which guards the pawn and targets the pawn on e2 at the same time, the computer says this is basically zeros after king h3, queen f6, simply because white does not have any checks here, and the king is very weak. If you ever go e5, now there's maybe queen to f1. If you go back, you really don't have any good moves. Maybe you can go queen h5, but after g5, now the queen is off sides. You can't really push the e pawn, and black is drawing quite routinely, I would say, at least in a computer game. So Bai Jinshi instead plays king d4 here, and his idea is he thinks he's going to bring the king down, or maybe go to e3 and go for some checkmate on f2. But now after Ding plays queen b5, the knight is very loose, the pawn on b4 is loose, and white is also intending to start pushing this e pawn up the board. So Bai Jinshi plays queen d6. Ding goes e5 here, attacking the queen. Now if you take the pawn, you lose the horse and the game. We get the move queen to c7 being played, and now Ding plays queen takes b4, and the rest is very simple here, because now if black plays king e5, there's queen f4, which is actually a checkmate. The king has no squares, but even if it weren't checkmate, you would drop the queen on c7. So the game concludes after king to e3. We get e6 here, knight to d5, queen b3, king to d4, and Ding sacks the queen with queen takes knight. We get king takes queen, e7 check here with the check on the king, and Bai Jinshi resigns the game, because when he moves the king, white will promote to a queen and win the game. And one funny line is if black goes king d6, you can under promote to a knight here, forking the king and the queen, and after king moves, takes king f3, white has an extra bishop and a pawn and will win the game. So after e7, Bai Jinshi resigns here. Ding Liren wins the first mini match by a score of 1.5 to half. Now, not the greatest return from Ding from the standpoint that it feels like the play was a little bit rusty. It took a lot of grinding here to get a win in this end game to win his first game of the new year. Nonetheless, Ding does win this. He moves on to the semifinals, where he will face off against Yu Yangyi. If he wins that, it's very likely, or actually, is it Yu Yangyi or Wang Hao? Maybe I'm wrong. Sorry, I think I'm wrong. I think in the semifinals, Ding Liren will be playing against his fellow Chinese super grandmaster Wang Hao, who was in the past rated 2750, did qualify for the candidates a few years ago. If he wins that, it's very likely he'll play against Yu Yangyi. So Ding Liren will have a very tough road to winning the first China Chess Kings Championship, but nonetheless, he has returned. He does win in his first match back in the great year of 2024. So it'll be very exciting to see what the future holds, both in this event as well as the Tata Steel event, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap of the return of the king, Ding Liren, the current world chess champion. And if you've not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below.